I want to welcome everyone to the final keynote session of the conference, really the final event of the conference except for our beloved banquets, which will be starting at 7 o'clock tonight. It is my great pleasure to introduce Annabel Cohen, professor and chair of psychology at the University of Prince Edward Island. Professor Cohen has published more than 50 book chapters and journal articles on audio perception, music cognition, audiovisual integration, and multimedia perception. She is the co-editor of The Psychology of Music and Multimedia, along with Sue-Lin Tan, Scott D. Lipscomb, and Roger Kendall. Her work has appeared in a variety of journals and anthologies, including Psychomusicology, American Psychologist, Psychology of Music, Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity and the Arts, the Routledge Companion to Music Cognition, Musical Communication, Musical Imagination, Multidisciplinary Perspectives in Creativity, Performance, and Perception, the Oxford Handbook of Music Psychology, Music Perception, and Contemporary Music Review. As you can see from that brief list, because there are many more publications beyond those, these are all topics that have been of central concern to the Society for Cognitive Studies of the Moving Image for many years. I will say Professor Cohen's scholarship has had a profound effect and direct impact on my own work, in part because her congruence association model, which she'll be talking about today, is something which had helped temper my youthful speculations about perception and cognition of film music. And I've certainly changed my thinking over the years as a direct result of reading Professor Cohen's scholarship. Also, Cohen's work offers an object lesson of how theoretical models are productively revised, expanded, in light of new research, new empirical findings that lead to new insights. With that, please welcome Professor Annabel J. Cohen.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to this. I want to thank the organizing committee, Jeff, Tico, Aaron, Jared, and Cindy, and the AV team. I want to thank you for inviting me to talk here. I've always looked at your programs and always wanted to come, and it happened finally. The presentations I've heard have been so stimulating and humbling. There's so much film scholarship in the room. So we've heard a lot about concepts of bottom-up and top-down processing and prediction and narrative and memory. And my presentation will use those concepts as well, but taking a different perspective, slightly different perspective, which is the auditory perspective, and more specifically, music. So as my presentation, integrating visual and audio, it's going to really emphasize music more, and tell you about the congruence association model with working narrative. So film music, what is it doing there? Why do our brains like it or even need it? Well, this is planned for my presentation to give some of the historical context. Sure, it will be known to many, but not everybody. Some early experiments on film music, and then I want to introduce this CAM WN, working narrative framework, model, theory, whatever we're going to call it. I think it has some elements of all of those things. And then talk a little bit about some current work. So music is typically not alone, we all know that. It's there with dance, song, theater, and film and computer games. But even the silent films had music. And that takes us to Hugo Münsterberg, who watched a few silent films in the last days of his life, which inspired him to write the quite famous book, the photoplay, famous for film theory, not for psychology because he was so notorious. He was pretty much put down by psychology, but very important in film theory, but I think some of his insights on music have not necessarily been appreciated, so I'd just like to mention that he thought film was more similar to music than to all the other arts, which was kind of interesting because photography was pretty close to it, theater. But he said, the freedom with which the pictures replace one another is to a large degree comparable to the sparkling and streaming of the musical tones. So he looked upon the film frames and the sequential film elements as like musical tones. And then a second analogy that he made, and we are prepared for this because of Bryn's presentation, he compared film to operate like a musical chord. And a chord is several notes played together, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So maybe you'll help me with this. I'm going to ask you to sing do. Will you sing, this group over there? Do, mi, so. Let's do it together. Do, mi, so. It's a beautiful sound. But he made the analogy to film clips, and as if the film clips were tones and they could be just juxtaposed so that you could have those ideas presented simultaneously and see the interrelation. So just as one example, this is his example, which is appropriate for his time, not politically correct now, but where a secretary was staying late with her boss, and the parents were worried about her, and the wife was worried about the husband. So the idea, this was his example of how these ideas would be juxtaposed as a musical chord. So I just think it's interesting to see how he thought about that. He only saw silent films, but soon there were the talking pictures, and what's interesting here is that it was thought that that would be the end of music in the film theater, but as Kalanick has said, the lifespan of the all-talking picture was brief. The need that music filled quickly reasserting itself. So there was a time, apparently, when and you've read about it, many of you, that there was very, very limited music in film, although it could have been there. And then they realized how important it was. So just to give an example of music, as we're going to play, yeah, just an interesting piece of film music. And just think of the many functions that this serves. So I'm not going to go and analyze that by any means, but have written about that at one time. But we may all have thoughts about how that music is having an influence on us, or how any music in a film is having influence on So are our insights correct is the question, and can conflicting insights be correct? So we need to carry out experiments to determine that. And examples of hypotheses are things like music has meaning, or the music influences the meaning of the film. What does it mean to say it influences the meaning? So we have to create, as psychologists, operational definitions of how we're going to measure that, at least in one type of research in psychology. So we can, in experimental psychology, say that meaning is shown when a group of people agree that a certain term applies to an item under discussion. Now that's a narrow view, but it is one way of making some progress. There are other ways through qualitative research. I'm going to be talking mostly about this type of research. And so the earliest research in film music was that of Percy Tannenbaum, and who was involved in communication studies, and he, along with Osgood Such and himself Tannenbaum, developed the semantic differential, which is a technique for trying to measure connotative meaning, which is different than denotative. So denotative, and we give the example of father and daddy. And daddy has a different kind of connotation. Attitude is daddy is softer and kinder and so on than father, just the way we think about it. But you can apply these feeling concepts to anything, and this is what they wanted to show and measure with the semantic differential. So it's interesting that Tannenbaum was the first to really study the effects of music it was in a drama, I think, a TV drama. And he says something about it being an unusual situation where they're going to look at whether the music influences the interpretation of the drama. So this was early research. And then a second piece of research that was conducted in 1983, so there wasn't much going on in this field, was by Thayer and Levinson, both of whom are very involved in emotion research. And they carried out a study in which participants were shown an industrial video film and that had 3 accidents in it. Probably wouldn't have passed an ethics board these days, but anyway, there were 3 accidents shown in it, and people watched it under one of 3 conditions. So one group saw it with music that would designed to increase the anxiety, and other to calm people, and then there was no music. So they showed that the skin conductance measure was affected by the background music. So that was evidence that the music definitely has an influence on aspects of watching a film. So along came a student of mine in the 1980s and wanted to do something on film music, and I was interested in that also. And it so happened that in her social psychology class, they had seen the Hyder and Simmel film, and which we'll see a little clip of it. In this very short animation, it was made in 1944. It was a very significant clip. Maybe we can show that now, just a bit of it. And when we were wondering what film could we use to study the effect of music in film, and she said, well, how about this? So it's a very simple animation. Many of you have seen it. Didn't look much better than this because it's from 1944. But when it was used in a social psychology study, they found that people interpreted this film and these geometric figures as characters, as people, and that there was a bully, the big triangle is a bully, and people interpreted this very systematically. So we wondered, could we change the interpretation of that film? Could we change the characters of the film by presenting background music? So we did this. And after a pilot study using Tchaikovsky, which got us off the ground, then Sandra Marshall created, she was a bit of a composer, so she created two different two scores for this, and we presented them to people in a number of conditions. So this is kind of a general principle for how to do this kind of research, that first of all, your task is always to find, select the stimuli they're going to use. So that was the first problem solved. But then to get the judgments of the audio by itself, the video by itself, and then combined. So we had multiple groups of people providing these judgments, and then to compare the judgments of the combined against the judgments made by people who saw the audio, heard the audio or saw the video by itself. And what we had them do was watch the film, or if it was audio, they rated, they did the same thing, but they listened. And they filled out semantic differential scales to get the connotative meaning along the 3 dimensions of the semantic differential, which are activity, that is, how active is something thought to be evaluative of how nice or awful it is, or potency, how strong or weak it is. So we got those 3 measures for the film overall, which I won't show you, but the separate characters. So this is kind of what was special about this, that we asked people to rate the 3 different geometric figures on all of these scales, and found that the music, this is, okay, to explain this, although you may have seen this before, but those are the 3 film characters represented there, the big triangle, little triangle, and the circle. And the ratings for evaluative, potency, and activity under 3 soundtrack conditions. What we called weak music, because it turned out when they judged that music was regarded as not highly potent music, and strong, which was judged as potent, high potency, and then control, no music, okay? Now, if the music didn't have any effect, all these lines would be parallel, okay? So the music is having an effect, but what is interesting is that, say, under activity, if you look at the strong music, and you compare that with the control group. So the small and the little triangle under no music have the same activity level. Okay. But now when you put the strong music, you get the strong music ratings, the little triangle is very far below in activity from the big triangle. Okay. So the music is not simply adding to the meaning of the characters. It's influencing them in different ways. And that was not totally straightforward. How do you explain that? Okay. So that's been the long-standing issue. And it was that small piece of information that led to this model, really. So how did it happen? And the explanation that we came up with was that the temporal structure of the music may have aligned itself better with one character over another, and your attention was then drawn to that character, and the meaning of the music then could be ascribed to the character. That was the answer. The film disintegrated. Could not go back and find that what happened there. Okay, it was 3/4 inch tape, and all right. But it has inspired others to try to get this effect with not a lot of success. But it's an interesting concept. So this led to focusing on congruence and association as separate concepts that were relevant to how music influenced film. So I just want to give a few examples. So congruence is very similar to the concept of Mickey Mousing, but we have some interesting examples to share anyway with you. So this one, with the music of Penderecki from The Shining, I like this example. If you see the image of the young boy moving his hand upwards on the knife and then down. So you listen to the music also going in that same direction. That was it. Yeah. So it's a good example of, see over in the corner, the music went up and somewhat down, very vividly, da, 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 as it went up. Okay. So another somewhat more subtle example is in Avatar, when Neytiri is noticing, spying on Jake and is about to kill him, and then a sprite comes by. So we'll see how this goes. Now that one, okay. You still have to wait a while till it happens. Was it. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you had this descending line of the music and the sprite, the wood sprite is moving down. So there's another one there, yeah. So there have been, there's research to indicate that the shared structure has an effect, or the people are sensitive to it, that they will be able to judge what is congruent and what is not. Scott Lipscomb did his PhD thesis looking at this issue of audiovisual congruence. And recently there's a wonderful paper by Clement and Pearson and several other authors, Marcus Pierce, I think. And they have created a set of stimuli called CAVA, very easy to find, that you can easily bring down and see. They're very abstract, simple stimuli, but he's shown the effect of congruence there on preference. Okay, here's one final example.
Oh, life could be a dream if I could take you up in paradise up above. If you would tell me I'm the only one that you love, life could be a dream, sweetheart. Now.
Okay, so the idea is to be sensitive to these structural characteristics of the visual information along with music. And the hypothesis is that you are your brain is sensitive to those congruencies, which Walt Disney knew about, but it's also more subtle in these examples. So the other concept is that of association, and that has to do with the meanings arising from wherever, all kinds of places they can be coming from your past experience, but also the information that's in the film. And association is very basic to psychology and to learning principles, and it's consistent with Pavlov's classical conditioning and the concept of leitmotif as well. So that one thing reminds you of another if you've given the experience of the two together. So an example that I'm going to show is that from the film War Horse. And here, Albert has taught the horse Joey to come to him when Joey whistles a certain way, or the owl call.
There's only 15 here.
Okay. So many years later, Joey is in a situation, they're both have been in the war, they've been separated, Joey has been injured, they both have been injured, but the horse is about to be shot because he's not in good shape, and he hears Albert call. Albert has been temporarily blinded, but he knows that the horse, he's heard there's a horse there that's in trouble, so he, owl call. So it's a very literal example of what an association is, but this is the type of thing that's going on in our minds all the time, that we're connecting things. Okay. So how is this explored? I've explored this in a couple of different ways with very simple stimuli, trying to understand what's going on. And here's an example where we used a bouncing ball image and on very simple audio. So the ball was presented in a 3x3 matrix of conditions, low, middle, and high bounce, and fast, middle, and slow. And similarly, the audio was low, middle, high, fast, middle, and slow. And we have some examples here of what this looks like. Oh, wait. Okay. People had to rate how happy or sad it was. So this is just a bouncing ball, but people are extremely systematic in the way they rate the happiness of this. So when they're rating just the ball by itself and just the sound by itself, you can see how these parameters of height and tempo affect both equally, all right? So a high bouncing ball is regarded as happy, and a high pitch is regarded as happy, fast is regarded as happy in either modality. So what happens when you put these together and you combine them, and when they're congruent, they complement each other and you get the expected pattern. When they are incongruent, so if you have a high bounce and a low pitch, you then have a neutralized emotion, okay? So this looks like evidence for additivity of these meanings together. Independently, they mean one thing, but when you put them together, it's not surprising that they do add together. And so you could say the brain doesn't care where it gets its information from. It just gets whatever it can, puts it together, and you get meaning out of it. So we did something similar with examples of wolves. Okay, these examples varied. Okay, they varied in friendliness and aggression, and the music, the background music, also varied in friendliness and aggression. So again, we had people rate these and showed that when you had friendly wolves with aggressive music, they were regarded as more aggressive, and vice versa. So there was an impact of the music on the interpretation of the friendliness and aggressiveness of the wolves. So it was fairly simple. Still, I mean, and the animal world may be slightly more simple than the human world. We went on to study some film clips, which I'm not going to be showing, but one clip showed a very dramatic fight scene. It was clearly aggressive. And the other was, you couldn't tell if it was conflict or amorous play or whether an attack was going on. It was ambiguous. And the music was very clearly sounding like conflict or love. I do this with my students, and they know immediately. Almost all of them are. There are some variations, I would admit. But anyway, when we played these different clips with the different backgrounds of music, we did find something surprising in that you couldn't change the meaning of the fight scene with love music in the background. It was very clearly visually a fight scene, and we couldn't change it. We didn't change it. But the ambiguous scene was dramatically changed by whether the music was expressing love or conflict. So that was something, I mean, not surprising in retrospect, but initially surprising. And meaning that the music has more influence, obviously, when the meaning is ambiguous. So other researchers have examined this and found similar results. So Mark Chevy, Shulan Tan, Marilyn Boltz, and again, this work of Clementi and Marcus Pierce is showing similar things. So I want to go back now to this study and the CAM model, because initially we explained it this way, that the music and the film had some structural overlap, which is at the X there, and that drew your attention to whatever was, the structural congruence drew your attention and then the meaning of the music could be ascribed to that. Okay, so that was the simple model idea, framework, theory. It wasn't really, it was not very well developed at that time, but we proposed it, and there it was. So we also began to think about film as narrative. And of course, that's very obvious to people who are in film studies, but not necessarily somebody who's in psychology. So we wanted to bring in that concept. And also, what I was influenced by Kinch's book on comprehension, and the idea that you are using your top-down processing and bottom-up processing to comprehend, and it seemed to be applicable in this situation. So then I had to add principles to what I just showed you, that now instead of just a bottom-up model, which I first showed you, had to be top-down with the cognitive mechanisms, including expectation of what is going to happen there, what is happening in this film. So, and then, well, in the original model, it was just music and visual. So no, you watch a film, there's speech. So you have to have speech in it. So this, I was very slow to come up with the view that that even wasn't complete. But this was what was working with at the next stage, with at the top you have long-term memory, is what we said, and thinking at that time also that vision had priority. You can see in kind of the second level that there's a split between meaning and structure. Okay, all of these three channels or surfaces, what they were called, are analyzed in the same way. There's a search for structure, there's a search for meaning in each of them. And this, when you have overlapping structure, then attention was directed in this model to the visual because of visual dominance. Okay, and once attention was directed there, then that information would be moving on to, at that time, short-term visual narrative is what I was thinking about. But then I came across Christian Metz, and he was the first theorist to really give credit to music. And he said, oh, but he also talks about sound effects, so that was added, and then writing text. So this model then became to look a little differently this way. So it's really based on Metz's categories, and I've heard research presented here today, not today, but while I was here. Yeah, we can look at the whole soundtrack as one. That isn't the way this is being looked at, but so this is the way this model was presented or was developed to distinguish these five different surfaces, all analyzed in the same way in terms of structure and meaning, and with the cognitive mechanisms presenting expectancies, trying to figure out what is going on there in the film. What is the best story I can make out of this information I'm getting? And so that ongoing story that you are making up as the observer is referred to as the working narrative, and with a little bit of association to Badley's working memory concept. So the idea that memory is playing a role here too, but it's not dealt with in any great extent. So this is sort of how it worked, with the audio-visual sensory information being encoded, and then inferences coming from experience, coming down. Okay, well, how do you know to make an inference? You know, so there are fast processes that are rough, that are rapidly sent to higher processing that gives clues. And then you start creating these inferences, and there you have it. You have the multimedia phenomenal experience, or what we're going to call the story, the narrative, and the working narrative. So all of these different categories: text, scenes, music, sound effects, and speech. And on the left, you'll see these leaked cues, these rough analysis that takes place quickly, that is cueing the long-term memory. So these fast cues coming down. All right, so that's a basic idea there. So the one thing that I didn't show you, but I have referred to it already, is when you look at the visual surface and the music surface, you see an arrow going from the music structure to the visual structure. And that is the congruence aspect of this. So the congruent information, and it could come from speech patterns, it can come from sound effects patterns, it could be in the way the text is presented, but your brain is processing structure, is what the argument here is. Okay, I'm going to skip those. So I'm skipping some consistent neurophysiology that underlies this. So from this, you could make a prediction that when you have a coherent working narrative, that is, it's coherent because the music fits with the film, you will have more, you will be more engaged in the film. So we carried out some studies on engagement. And one study examined, okay, this is the kind of study they would watch an audio-visual presentation, very short, and simply say, how engaged are you in this? And we looked at different types of material, some very realistic, like news, and all the way to animation, so kind of a continuum here, to explore whether with the music you had more of an effect of engagement. And certainly the music didn't help with the news, but it did lead to higher ratings of absorption or engagement. We then went on to the next step with, let me go back here, with the film's Witness excerpts, very short excerpts from Witness and Day of the Jackal, and looked at the relative contribution of sound effects, music, and speech that was still influenced by the model and the different categories of sound. So the question was, would one of these sound categories have a greater influence on engagement than another? And so in the example I'm going to show you, the young boy, Samuel, is the only witness to a murder, and the detective brings him to the police station to try to find out if he can match his memory with some examples of criminals that he has information about. So while the detective is off in his office, the young boy is looking at a place where he sees a picture of a police officer, and he recognizes the police officer as the criminal, as the murderer. So in the original, there's only music in the background. And I'll play that for you. And then we made up a sound effects version and a speech version. And we asked people to rate, different groups of people saw these, and they rated their absorption in the clip, the realism of the clip and the professional quality of the clip, because we made these and we are not professionals, so we wanted to just see. We also did the same thing, so I gave you an example with Witness. We did a similar thing with Day of the Jackal, but we didn't have the same example, like a really good music example to start out with, and we made our own separate speech, music, and sound effects examples there. So. To the next one. I think my time is. Do you want to play the next one? Yeah.
The only description the guard could give was that was.
This is the jackal one. Anyway, the main point of thing that came out of this was that the people claim they were most absorbed in the Witness music one, music alone. So this was kind of support for the idea that music engages people in the film, in a film. I mean, and you've no doubt had that sensation of without the music, you may not be as engaged. And the effect did not appear in the Jackal one, but we made the music for that. So that would be a reason. So this is something to pursue. Okay, there's problems when we are asking people how absorbed are you in it. There's bias, there's introspection, they may know what you're looking for. So we carried out other research, a similar type, but indirect. So with this, we used the film The Railroader, which is a silent film, and you may have noticed a little X in the corner there. So this music, the music is written by Eldon Rathburn, who specialized in railroad music, if you can imagine. And so he was an expert on this, and for 20 minutes you would get this amazing soundtrack. And what we did was embedded X's every minute of the soundtrack, and then asked people to click on as soon as they saw an X. So we had the really good soundtrack, and we put also another one in that was not made for the film, and then there was a no music condition. And the idea was that when you had really good music, you would be more absorbed in the film, and you would miss more X's, or you would take longer to see them, okay? So this shows X's, like when they weren't just in one corner, they were in a different place, they were distributed. So people, different groups of people saw X's in different places, so we controlled for that. So the results here show that the original music led to slower, it was slower, all right? Which is interesting. So that it suggests that you are more absorbed in the film when the music is fitting with this. So Another aspect of CAM, which I would like to emphasize, is we need to take into account who this is applying to. So, I mean, and looking at age, all right? So the chronometric perspective, a lifespan developmental perspective, that young people today are being exposed to videos, and their way of viewing, we've heard this at this meeting, their way of viewing films are very different than that of an older person. And James Cutting has shown how the change in frequency of cuts is increasing over time. So people are exposed to different kinds of media, and it's changing their brains. So just to keep in mind, it's not the same model for everybody. I just want to tell you a little bit, take me a minute to tell you about what we're doing right now in testing the CAM model. And we started this last summer, so I was very happy to come. Then I got the invitation after we'd started it, and I said, oh, I'm going to have some new information. But ethics is very thorough at my university. We didn't get opportunity to start the study till March, at which time our student was about to have a baby, so that took priority for some reason over our study. But I was very fortunate to have Louisa Dumas come by. She was already had an undergraduate music degree and was a graphic artist, and Lena Hanger, who's a postdoctoral fellow in my laboratory, and she's amazing at putting experiments together. So we were looking at this CAM model, the question of whether music video would communicate meaning better if there was structural congruence, right, between the music and the video. So Louisa created 2 short animations for each of 6 different emotions. So a very short animation to represent calm, 2 for agitated, 2 for joy, and she did this for the video and also the music. So we ended up with 12 temporally congruent music video clips, each aiming to convey an emotion. And we also turned those into incongruent clips by either shifting the music in time or stretching and shrinking it. So did that in 2 ways. We had 2 groups of people, and we don't know the answer to this, but I just want to share what we're doing right now. Okay, so we have 2 groups of people. One is rating just the audio by itself and just the video by itself. And then the other group is rating the combination of the audio and the video. Okay, and I'll show you what the combined condition is like here. Pretend you're a participant in the study and you've got a screen close up. Okay, and we went very quickly. This is the instructions, but you'll see these are the pilot. And then you have to rate this. So you're rating these different emotions, and then you'll go on. This is just the pilot. It was a very long example. This is another one. So I won't play anymore, but I think you get the idea of that. And the prediction is that the intended emotion will be communicated better when the audio and the video are congruent. And then there's some other more complex predictions, but I won't go into that either right now. So I will just conclude to say that experiments in film music are definitely multidisciplinary. I was happy to see groups of people who are coming from different disciplines working together. There's such a benefit of a collaboration. That there's a value in anomaly, and I guess we all know that when something weird happens, don't overlook it, but it could be very important. So that happened a couple of times. We have to trust the data but replicate it, and I think that is the end of my presentation.
All right, we have some time for questions. I'll start with Carl.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for that very interesting talk. I just have a couple of questions about how you rate congruence between music and image. Or how do you determine congruence? I mean, you talked about structural congruence, and that's between the movement on the screen and the perceived movement or rhythm of the music.
Yeah.
But then you also have emotional congruence, right?
Yeah, that's semantic. That's a separate
That's not
aspect.
structural congruence?
No, that is not structural congruence. That's more associationist.
Associationist.
Yeah, having to do with meaning. Yeah. So with the wolf study that I was telling you about, we tried to separate those two things out, but our clips were very, very short. So the wolf example was semantic or associationist. That's what I focused on when I was talking today about it. We did actually try to make those clips incongruent and to see if we could get that, but they were so short. So these are much longer. I'm actually not all that optimistic we're going to get the result that we would like from it, because I think the materials are too complex. But I wanted to allow our student to have the freedom to create and make this her study. So we'll see. But I think we may have to go simpler. And even as they're very simple. They're black and white. That was a decision that was made to try to keep the number of variables simple, fewer than necessary, than they could be.
That makes perfect sense to me. I just asked because there seem to be so many ways that you could measure congruence between music and image.
Yeah,
music
so
and
this is
narrative,
why
music and pacing, music and rhythm. There's just so many
so structural
platforms of congruence.
Well, but in terms of the timing is really one aspect. The temporal congruence, I think, is the main thing we would like to get under control to begin with. All right, and then we can go off into something more complex. Yeah, so I think there's value in looking at these issues at a very granular level, and also at systematically getting more complicated and into segmentation of phrases, for example, into that aspect as well. So it is multiple levels, but I think the main thing is to be thinking that these structural characteristics could be applied to any visual information. I mean, they're independent, if that makes any sense. I don't know if it does. Yeah.
We have a question here.
Here,
Yeah.
hi, thank you. I have a series of questions, but two of them are yes or no questions, so it won't take long. I should say, however, that my questions are informed by self-interest, so I apologize if you're not, this is not necessarily the kind of question you like to answer, but I was curious about whether, because I noticed that several of the videos that you showed us today featured what I would call non-human figures, right? There were the triangle and the square, the wolves, the horse, right? So I was wondering if that was by design or if that's just a coincidence.
No, well, what I was talking about here?
Yeah, the ones that you showed us.
So there was the idea that the geometric figures you would have more control over. You have more control over the animals. And then when you have more realistic figures, and I didn't really show you the example with something from a feature film, that's more complex. So I think it's useful to look at that dimension of complexity.
Yeah, because that was my other question. Well, question number 2 was about the one time where you didn't find that association between the music and, or rather, like you changing the music and the scene didn't seem to influence the perception of the emotion they were supposed to feel. You talked about a fight scene, right?
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that fight scene was, like, I assume like 2 people fighting, right?
Yeah.
So I guess like my third question, the one I wanted to get to was, all right, so do you think that perhaps what's happening here, or have you considered the possibility that what's happening here is that when we're looking at images of not people, right, we don't have as many cues as to what emotion to feel, right? Because we don't necessarily recognize what emotion a triangle is experiencing or a wolf is experiencing, right? But when you have human figures, then it'll be hard for you to change the perception of whatever emotion you're supposed to be feeling because you can recognize that emotion on the people's, faces, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've considered that possibility, but
Yeah,
maybe
no,
it's a basic
makes
one.
makes a lot of sense. It's consistent with the view of there's greater ambiguity. When there's ambiguity, then the music can have an influence, and there would be greater ambiguity in those 2 other examples that you mentioned of the animals, I think. And unless you are, your world is cats and dogs, which it is for some people, and one would have to control for that.
Right,
Yes.
thanks.
Yeah.
Next is down here with Go, and then James, and then Malcolm.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. I'm curious about the interaction of the visual and audio, and I'm very interested in the mechanism of the counterpoint. Like sometimes in the film, like negative music is used in the positive scene, like in the film of the Clockwork Orange, like happy music is used in a violence scene. So, like I'm interested in the mechanism.
Well, this would be using associations in an aesthetic way. The director would be wanting you to have the meaning context or the meaning of, the music can bring multiple meanings. One thing about music is you can have emotional counterpoint, I would call it, that you can have one line giving you happy sound and another line in the music giving you a negative sound or a sad sound. Those things can be combined in music and can present the complexity of the situation. So yes, there is research on this. Definitely there's a book about the value of incongruent meaning. Yes, I mean,
Thank you.
Yes, that's right.
Annabel, thanks.
Next,
Am I on?
James.
Yeah. Thanks. I've always been a fan of association and congruence, but can we talk about incongruence? So let's talk about Quentin Tarantino and Reservoir Dogs and Stuck in the Middle with You. And Stuck in the Middle with You is diegetic music in the scene because he turns on the radio. And it seems to me that makes the scene even more horrible than it would have been without the music. And so it's not an ameliorative effect of having one kind of valence and another kind of valence. It's that the pop music makes the things that are bad even worse. Could you comment?
All I could say is I could agree with you on that. Sorry.
I would say you had
Yeah.
just mentioned the book on incongruence.
Yeah.
That is David Ireland's like central example for the very reasons that you're mentioning here. So, although he has like, I forget, where's Garrett when we need him? Like 3 or 4 different ways of thinking about incongruence itself as well. So, let's see, Malcolm is next.
So thanks so much. I was just wondering about this idea that music increases our engagement with or our absorption in the film. I'm wondering if there are any limits on this or whether this is always the case. I ask because one of my pet peeves about a lot of contemporary films is I feel they're overstuffed with music, and I actually find that disengages me from the film. But more objectively, there are, of course, films that we think of as highly engaging that have no music. Right, so the Blair Witch Project and No Country for Old Men, if I'm remembering correctly, and so on. I just wondered if you'd had any thoughts about that.
No, I'm aware that there's wonderful films without music. But if you have a good composer, they could do well with engaging you in music. I mean, there's part of that. If the music does not seem right, it may seem right to others, for one thing. So there are a lot of individual differences in this. I can't say too much more about it. I mean, it's a situation, question of aesthetics and people's background and what they want to hear in a movie, but I think do you have experiences where the music engages you, such as in the Westworld example, seeing that with the credits with the music? I mean, did that bother you, or?
Oh, no, of course. No, I'm just wondering if it's always or automatically the case. And it does seem to me that with, say, No Country for Old Men, the lack of music is actually something that really draws you into the film. It just doesn't seem to me, one shouldn't, I think, assume, right, that music equals greater absorption or engagement.
No, well, first of all, it depends on how well the score matches the work. And art is always breaking rules, too, for aesthetic effect. So, I mean, silence is very important in film, of course. And we have also someone working here on issues of silence. And, they're just scratching the surface with these studies that have carried out. But thank you.
Next, we have a question in back.
Right. It's not really a question because a few people before me also spoke about incongruency. Coming from design and as a practitioner and a teacher of design, we always look at breaking rules as something to make your viewer, user, or whoever sit up and take notice, right? Now, there are some places where you don't want to break the rules, something like a textbook of engineering. You don't want to break the rules there because there's a lot of cognitive load in the content itself. But then there is something like, I want to catch your attention, so I'm going to do something that breaks the rule. So in that sense, if we are looking at film, and also because our audience has learned so much about, what makes a suspense film, what sounds like a suspense film. And if I were to break that, that will make my audience sit up and wonder, what is wrong here? Why is there a upbeat music to this particular scene, which is supposed to be very serious? And it kind of increases, maybe, cognitive load and makes you think. So in that sense, I feel like as filmmakers or practitioners, we can use incongruency to actually do this. The question that I was trying to frame, I still haven't, is when you showed the railroader experiment, where you had them mark out the crosses, right? Now in that, I don't know, I have not seen that video, but I wanted to know if there's an actual story to the video.
Oh, yeah.
And if they are following the story and they are still able to make out the crosses, would that work in a film like Witness? Or would an experiment like that work in the film Witness, for example? Because there's so much immersion in the story there.
Well, they're engaged in the story, but they seem to be less engaged when there's no music and when there is music that was not designed for it. So it did have an effect. They're better at it. When there's less of a story, they're able to detect the X's more quickly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one last question from Maurice Smith.
Okay, thank you for a terrific talk. My question is about visual dominance. I think briefly that popped up in the talk.
Yeah.
And the question is this, so I guess it comes in two parts. I'm imagining that that a kind of orthodox view in perceptual psychology, I'm embarrassed to be saying this in this community, but I'm guessing that a kind of orthodox view is that biologically, that amongst our senses, even though our senses are always interacting, there is a biological reality to some kind of visual dominance, yeah? So that's the first part. The second part of the question then is, so how much latitude from your, many studies is there for that visual dominance to be sort of altered, reshaped, as it were, such that music and other forms of sound kind of like are compared with, ecological, ordinary experience. It can be kind of reset so that music and other forms of sound are less dominated by the visual modality, or is it a very fixed kind of limited?
Well, I think you have to really control the situation and try to get it, and you can. When Marilyn Boltz has done some research on this to show that the auditory dimension can dominate, and the visual will have an influence on the auditory sense of what, in her studies. That's all I can say. You can do it, but I think vision does
take
dominate.
Some doing.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay, thank you, thanks.
Tico and Aaron would like to offer some just final remarks, but before that, please thank Annabel.
Hi, we realize that it'd be nice if we get a proper sense of closure. So I just very briefly, I think it's just important to thank the people, particularly were supporting this conference, and I'm really considering Cindy in the back and our tech team. So I think it's time to give them applause. Second, I'd like to, I know our conference aides and our conference assistant who have been helping us out, and I also think they deserve a round of applause. And the last thing I really want to do is thank you. I mean, what made this conference happen was your attendance here. It was your exploratory papers that keep on expanding the discipline or the multidisciplinarity of this work, and which I found this year particularly rich. So I want to thank you for your congeniality, your ongoing intellectual curiosity, which I really think makes this conference so worthwhile. So thank you very much for that.
couple important announcements before we break up. I'm very excited to report that there's some news on the future locations, and the important announcement is keep your eye on your email inbox, and you'll learn very soon to keep the suspense going. So to be continued on that one. And sometimes it's tradition to announce the next one, but there's lots of excitement in the air about future locations. So the board will definitely be deliberating, and we'll announce some prospective locations in the near future. So that's exciting. And please, for those of you who are attending the first time, come back. Bring your friends, definitely, and spread news of our wonderful society around far and wide. And I'm so delighted for those of you who are coming to Canada for the very first time. I hope that you had a really lovely time, and you will continue to have a very lovely time, especially if you are staying a little bit longer past the conference. Just one last set of directions. It pertains to the banquet tonight. So this is just a reminder that the banquet is for those who have purchased a banquet ticket already in advance. We regret to say that that needed to have been done at the time of registration, so there are no further tickets for sale, unfortunately. The order's already been placed with the University Club, so unfortunately, if you didn't purchase a ticket, you're not able to attend, I regret to say. Doesn't mean that we don't love you, it just means that it's restricted to those who've purchased their ticket ahead of time, because of course we love you very, very dearly. For those of you who are attending, the banquet is starting, I don't know, check your program, you'll see the start time. What time is it, Tico? 7 o'clock, and we have the space until, I believe, 10 o'clock. And so the festivities, the Wild Rumpus will